So glad you guys know how to do this.
All right. Well, hello everyone and welcome. My name is Mark Huron and I am here today co-hosting with Casey McFarlane, and we are speaking with Dr. Ray Arnaud, Selena Wong, and Robert Laurie about repairing our relationship with nature. Casey is a young advocate and a student of nature, and from a young age she has been enticed by the wonders of life, and she continued to self-study plants for nutritional health, emotional well-being, and physical and spiritual healing. She uses her spare time to spread their messages and make connections and hope to repair and bridge, between man and nature. And this is all part of her new podcast series. Dr. Ray is a naturopathic doctor. She's passionate about health and healing of people in nature. She combines modern healing modalities with traditional medicine, and she encourages transformational well-being. Selena Wong is a devotee of the cannabis plant as a spiritual ally. She is the CEO of the Flower of Life Cannabis Company and has recently begun a YouTube series under that umbrella. And Robert Laurie is an international lawyer honing in on commercial, business, regulatory issues, and charter and constitutional legalities surrounding cannabis and psychedelic plant medicines. Welcome to the program, everyone.
Yeah, thank you so much.
It's great to be here. Thanks for the invitation, Casey. So I'm going to pass it over to you, and you can get the ball rolling, seeing as this is your show.
Awesome. Yeah, well, thank you all so much for being here today. Just a great honor to be involved in what's happening right now. And I hope to spark inspiration for more conversations like this to be had. Today, I'd like to talk about medicine and healing. Although I'm not qualified to give advice, nor can I tell anyone what they can and cannot do, I can recognize the blatantly obvious that our health heavily depends on nature. I believe that by getting back into balance with her, it could very well pave the way towards real health and healing for humanity. So I have a question for you, Selena. Why is communing and respecting the spirit of things so important?
Oh, that's such a great question. I would say it's really the foundation for our relationship with everything in and around us. And I think it's important because, not only are we in nature, we are nature. And I think what's happened, especially in Western culture, is we've really become disconnected from that. So taking the time to reconnect and bridge the gap and commune with these plants, I believe, and I've seen in herbalism, for example, they really have a lot to share with us. And if we can really put ourselves in a space to quiet our ego mind and open our mind and our heart to be able to bridge that gap and make the connection, I think that nature has a lot that she wants to share with us. And from my experience, what I've noticed with cannabis anyways, and also Gaia, our sentient earth mother, is there's so much love there. There's this unconditional love, the support, there's nurturance everywhere. And I think, again, there's this disconnect within ourselves for that. So I think that's part of the lessons that they're here to teach us. And that's why I think it's so important to make the connection again.
Mm-hmm. It seems like we're searching so hard for meaning in our lives when it's right in front of our face. And like all of these things that we're wanting to invent and make drastic progress, we could find through nature, I feel.
I completely agree. And I think, the more we can reconnect with, that core facet of ourselves, that we are nature, that we are part of this body of Gaia, I think there's so much more wisdom that we can glean and a lot more purpose in our lives. And I think instead of, being caught up in the cog in the wheel rat race, of the machine, we really come back into our sense of selves and really bridging that knowingness of our purpose in this world. And I think there's a lot of health and healing that can come from that.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Does anyone have anything to add to that?
But Ray, go ahead. I think
you go. Yeah.
Well, it's really great to talk about nature and a connection to it. And, nothing became more, I guess as a young kid, I spent a lot of time in the woods and in nature. And then with living in England and practicing corporate law, I was spending less time in states of nature. And my first legal aid case that I got 7 years ago, was a constitutional case involving a hereditary chief and his nephew in Haida Gwaii shooting seals and sea lions. For me, that was incredible. Boarding a float plane on the provincial government's dollar. I did one of my first interviews at a potlatch, which was incredible. But for me, the chief said, "Hey, I got to go see my other lawyer." And he threw me his keys to his truck and he said, "Go explore the island." And there were no CCTV cameras. There was like very little development. Something changed in me in that experience where I literally felt like I'd gone back to a state of nature, something quite primitive in terms of wanting to connect to something that was lost. And I really bring that theme to how I practice law, because a lot of it is, especially with the interest I have with First Nations and Indigenous, is, well, those groups, many of which have not lost their connection with land and, still are living in balance with nature. And ultimately, nature, I believe, provides many of the solutions. It's just we forgot how and where to look.
It's almost like we want to learn and we want to innovate all the time, and we think we're smarter than everything else, but we're actually super intertwined with nature. And if we could communicate with her, then we could get all of these answers we're looking for. And it doesn't have to be such a struggle. Like, it doesn't have to be so hard. And I think every person in the whole world could benefit from it. I don't think it's singular to a certain class or a certain tribe or,
There's a universality of it. I mean, especially I was explaining this to my wife, and I was just like, I don't want to sound cliche, but there is a real unity and a oneness and a realization of belonging to something greater than yourself. And I've also had the benefit of representing and being personally friends with a lot of, really hardcore founders in ecology and Greenpeace. And they were so right and so ahead of this. I mean, they pioneered ecology like 40 years ago. And it's really only been in the last little while that we're recognizing the importance and the necessity of bringing an ecological approach to everything that we're doing. And I think we're at this crossroads now with psychedelics. And I guess before I get to some news, it really is that connection with nature is completely amplified with, I want to call it, with a connection and a symbiotic use of those plant medicines. So it's that realization of, if we don't take care of nature, we're literally slitting our own throat and holding a gun to our head. And how long before we end up pulling through and pulling the trigger?
Totally.
The good news is the choice is in our hands.
I'd like to think, it appears that sometimes it looks like we're getting pretty close to that. But one thing I wanted to share, I thought was kind of unique to the conversation, is a silly little Facebook meme I saw yesterday that totally made sense. And it says, "Us humans are the only species that pay to live on this planet."
Yeah. It's
right?
so weird.
Wow.
And especially when you look at nature, nature's the best pharmacy, it's the best healer. We're all here as a byproduct of nature, as nature, yet, the greed of our species has certainly, changed the way of the world, right? Especially when you take a look at just the indigenous people, and not even that long ago, 150, 200 years ago, it all started changing in a much more colonial way. So, I love the idea that, we're having these conversations about getting back to nature and getting back to the roots of who we are and what life's about.
And if we're using all of these things every day, from a carrot to lumber, like, wouldn't we want to have a connection with that? We're so disconnected from our food. We're disconnected from what we build our homes with. We're disconnected from the clothes we put on our body. Like, it would be absolutely transformational.
Just to add to it, like, I remember in my undergrad 20 years ago learning about something called ecofeminism, right? Which, again, really, I think, put a whole new dimension on how do you look at economics, because you take a mother's love. Well, what's the quantitative, qualitative, actual dollar amount you can put on a mother's love, right? It's priceless. It's invaluable. Yet, and also without it, you can't survive. And so an ecofeminist approach to environmental issues are, I think, the way that we need to look at some of these broader pictures. I mean, the way you look at a tree or a wood is, well, if I cut it down in lumber, there's the more profitable use. But the ecofeminists might look at that and say, well, you might want to harvest some, but you're going to need to leave enough or do it in a way that, well, you don't diminish that mother's love, which without it, you're not going to flourish or survive. And so I don't know, I think it's time to be considering some of these other tenets into our modern and current contemporary notion of what economics is and what it should look like.
That's fascinating.
And one of the things that I'm always mindful of is, why are we measuring how well we're doing, for example, economically by how much money we make or how much more money we make this year than last year? And instead, why aren't we shifting our focus to how happy are people, how healthy are people, how enriched are the lives of the citizens or the people that this system is meant to serve? And I think along the way, we've gotten really lost. And I really appreciate what you're saying there, Rob, because, especially, when you look at a herbalist perspective, you're going out into nature, you're wildcrafting, you're foraging, but you're also really mindful of the cycles of the season and making sure that there's enough left over for the next season. So for example, when we're tuning into nature, I know for myself, I can speak to my own experience. When I'm out and I'm wildcrafting, I'll actually commune with the plants and I'll ask the plants first, may I have some of your medicine? And if there is a permission there, then yes, you can take some of it, but also being really mindful to leave seeds, leave other plants intact so that way they can continue that cycle of life. And I think unfortunately with, the capitalist society that we live in right now and the economy, we forget that sustainability really is the name of the game. And I wonder if, part of this renaissance that's happening right now is a firm reminder from nature that we really need to be mindful of this full circle approach and really what is our end goal. And if it's to have people live healthy, happy lives, then how can we readjust the way that we're experiencing this society, for example, to accommodate that?
That's wonderful. Yeah. And the way that nature already has symbiotic relationships with the plants around it, like what gives us the right to go and wipe out a whole forest to plant the same deciduous tree that will grow in a very long time? Like, we're wiping out so much life that exists there, and so much intelligence,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that comes
I think about these wise elder trees, that have been around for literally thousands of years, and how they're being clear cut just to make space to plant these new
Mm-hmm.
trees, like you're saying. And I'm thinking, just because we at this point in our human evolution, we've lost our ability to communicate, it doesn't mean that these trees don't have the wisdom that we really desperately need in order to transcend what we're going through right now collectively.
Most people have not seen those trees, and I think that's very problematic. And when we have probably the majority of the world's population currently lives in urban environments, our bodies have not attuned. We haven't grown up with that being a normal thing, and so people actually you can't want something that you don't know you can have. And so I think that's the tragedy that we're facing in British Columbia, Canada, Vancouver Island, is that more than 75%, or maybe it's even up to 90% of our old growth forests have already been cleared. And to get to the really incredible stands where you can actually get to where, nature, and actually I do want to talk about the word nature and just the problematic use of that term, but what do we mean by that? Do we mean like a plant? Do we mean several plants? Do we mean intact ecosystems? So anyway, when I think of like really deep nature, experiences, I think of really complex biodiversity, because I was walking in Lynn Valley, not far from here the other day, and it's basically.
You say Lynn Valley or
Lynn Valley? Lynn
Oh.
Valley. It's near Vancouver here, because I don't know where everybody's watching, but there are certain parts of Lynn Valley which are basically just tree farms, right? It's just very monoculture tree farms. And having grown up very near old growth forest on Vancouver Island, I just realized that you know, the fact that people have not physically seen some of these places means that they don't know actually what they're losing. And yeah, so developing a relationship with nature, you know, you actually have to go into it, you have to see it, you have to kind of interact with it. But before, yeah, what I wanted to say about that, just in the term, from, you know, using the term nature is, even speaking of the term nature, you know, as something that is disconnected or not of us, that you have to go into, is also an interesting way of looking at it. And I think that just stems right into, you know, just the question of what's natural and what's not. And this is a question of so kind of defining what nature is, because this is a question, you know, we're talking about medicine, we're talking about health. As a naturopathic physician, I encounter all the time, because people come to me and they think that naturopathic medicine is the use of natural therapies. And it's not actually. It's actually a philosophy of healing. And you know, and so it's when there's you can think of nature as a thing or as an object that can be seen, felt, or touched, or you can think of nature as the complex processes that create life, right? And you know, you can have some value statements around, say, what's more natural is like, say, more complex, or what sustains more life, say, for example. You know, the question of, you know, one of the topics that we wanted to talk about today was, you know, how do we talk about natural healing and nature and plants and having a connection with nature in the context of modern society? And because, you know, as a naturopathic physician, I prescribe both what some people would call unnatural things that are, in my opinion, nature promoting. And I also prescribe things that are natural in ways that are actually not nature promoting or not health promoting. So, you know, how, you know, what is natural is a question. And I think that, you know, it's important to look at these things when we're looking at what the net effect of what we're doing is, because we might think that taking a plant just because it's a plant is a good idea. And, you know, we could be over-harvesting that plant, right? Or something like that, right? Versus we may have a synthetic alternative that is actually better, you know, for helping people, that does not, say, decimate an ecosystem or something like that. So I just wanted to kind of throw that into the conversation a little bit. Yeah.
I so appreciate that.
Yeah. Great.
What does balance look like to you, Ray? Where would you think we should begin to repair our relationship with nature?
Well, like I said, I mean, you can't miss or love what you can't see or touch, you know. And I think that you know, there's a mix of outward balance that has to be balanced with inward balance. And you know, it's interesting you saying this, Rob, about your you know first experiences being in environment and, you know, at Haida Gwaii and with First Nations, because I also came from, you know, a degree in environmental studies, geography, and sociology, and I really was on my way to, you know, becoming an environmental lawyer, and I really wanted to save the world, and I was an environmentalist, and what I found is that the environmental movement was suffering because people weren't in balance with themselves, and it's really hard to convince people to save the world, whatever that means, if you know they can't save themselves. And that's what led me into medicine, and ultimately also into psychedelic therapies for myself personally, but all forms of transformative therapies, right, to come into balance with nature, right? So that was and it doesn't have to be a natural substance that does that, right? And so again, getting back to what is nature, because if we can establish an internal balance, that means we are coming into harmony more with nature, and we're able to go care for things other than ourselves, and we're in balance internally. So, you know, you can't really see the beauty when, you know, around you, and respect the beauty around you and put effort into it when you're, you know, stressed, or you're poor, or, like, you know, all the social determinants of health, all those other things. So
if I can build on that, just the you know, what I've noticed is with psychedelics is also a better appreciation for generations, is the gap or the connection between mother, father, and then me as a parent, between my daughter and my son, and that feeling of a connection to many things out of that. But I mean, that's, I think, you know, while having had psychedelic therapy and those experiences, is again, it's just made me feel a lot more responsibility that I have for the part that I have to play, you know, between being, well, a son and now a father, if that makes sense, and that place within that circle of life, which I don't know, you don't necessarily have as great of an appreciation for those things otherwise.
And
Absolutely.
I wanted to add to what you were saying too, Ray, about the, you know, so many of us live in the city in these concrete jungles. We never commune with nature in a great way. And for me, you know, I spent 6 years of my life growing up in the Haida Gwaii in the 70s. So we were remotely connected to nature as kids. So, you know, there was a connection there. And then, you know, you come into the cities, and it's this whole Western world of being, and not just the cities, the small towns. We're human doings. We're not human beings. And there's a beingness of nature that is not of a doingness. You know, everybody's in the city, and with everything that's been going on in the world today, you know, we've had a chance to slow down versus always be doing, because not everybody's working, businesses are closed, the world's changed. So I think this is an even greater opportunity for people to connect with nature, because we know it's good for our immune system, we know it's good for our mental health, we know it's good for our energy and how we connect. And I think we need to take that time to come back to our beingness and leave our doingness.
So true. Yeah, I have a question for you, Robert. It is, what do you think about the future of plant medicines in a financial sense? Like, I see such opportunity, but it would be so awesome if there would be a way we could provide access for everyone and not just rich people, like people who are homeless, who don't have the financial funds to be doing that. Like, I'm curious if there's something that could happen with Health Canada, or like, you know, tax dollars or insurance.
I think it comes down to a willingness to want to do something in the first place. And from being legal counsel to probably 40% of the unlicensed dispensaries who, you know, part of my advice was, you're going to have to justify being there. I mean, just providing cannabis isn't going to be good enough. You're going to have to make the streets cleaner, safer, you know, consider strategies like needle pickups, needle swaps, or like, you know, cleaning up alleyways, and effectively being prepared to do what the government can or won't do. And I don't know, I'm a big believer in the welfare state. I'm also kind of beside myself with what's come to it. I think we've got more than enough resources that there shouldn't be anyone homeless. There shouldn't be anyone going without food in a developed country like Canada. I think really what it comes down to is horrible mismanagement of resources. And so psychedelics, they don't have to be, I mean, I don't think any of this has to be, I mean, and isn't as a financial, there's other reasons for doing it. I mean, the government could produce cannabis and other plant medicines on a large scale and make everybody a shareholder and give them a dividend. But you see, they don't do business that way. It's private interest that the only reason they'll get into it in the first place is so they can profit. And, you know, not to name names, but there's some groups out there trying to do things that involve clinics, and, well, they look to the provincial government as to what would a subsidized treatment or a cost to subsidize a treatment. And that's what I love about psychedelics. Something that groups are claiming should be $200 to $300 to $500 a treatment ultimately is a $45 bag of mushrooms, a playlist on Spotify, blindfold, a secure area, and a comfortable place for which to lie down and do that. And there's no reason that everybody in our community should not be able to utilize and access the tools to begin to at least look at themselves. And to go back to the point that was made earlier, how can you change the planet until you, well, fix yourself? And It's very true. You can't do much until you take those steps. And ultimately, I think that's what the psychedelics are beautiful for. They allow you to be able to look at yourself and actually understand what you need to change, not what other people think or what society dictates, what's right for you, so that you begin to live in concert. And, you know, I remember the first time I did the deep dive, when I took off the blindfold, I said very emphatically and inspirationally to the operator, I said, I will fight for the right of anyone to be able to engage in medicine in a way that's safe and is enabling them to self-actualize and become their best personal self. Now, that's not going to happen overnight, but it certainly allows the first step to begin that work, so that at least when it does come time at the end of the day, when you're, you know, I look at it this way. It's better to be working on those things now, because when you die, you're going to have a lot of time in eternity to think about it. So it's better to make the good now and the changes, and not wait till the very end.
You heard it here, folks.
Completely agree. I'm curious, just to add to that, Rob, do you think that there could potentially be, you know, the opportunity for us to structure things in a different way? Like, I know in the cannabis space, I was really hoping that some of the recreational sales would go back into medical to help the medical patients that couldn't necessarily afford the treatment or the therapies. Do you think that, I mean, I understand what you're saying, mushrooms right now, really accessibly priced. But I'm curious, you know, for people, for example, I mean, you and I both know if somebody's at end of life and they're critically and chronically ill, oftentimes they've exhausted a lot of their financial resources. They've done everything their physician has told them to do and the medical system has told them to do. And they've usually invested in a slew of different supplements and natural medicines as well. And oftentimes, unfortunately, when people really need the medicine the most, they don't have those resources available. So I'm just curious, what do you think about that?
I was lucky. I mean, that's being in this industry. When my dad was diagnosed, was it 4 years ago, with stage 1 rectal cancer, while I gave him an address and a farm in the valley, and turned out to be the crew that invented shatter and taught Rick Simpson how to make Rick Simpson's oil. So Dad was in good shape. But people say, oh, are you worried about breaking the law? I'm like, it's my dad. I'll step over the law and stomp on its throat 6 days from Sunday if it means I save my dad.
Yeah.
And ultimately, you know, I was very worried that if I had to go toe to toe with whoever to explain it, it's just like, what do you want? Like, by the time if we went through, and I mean, I did get my dad his papers and we did get him up, but in the initial phase where days and weeks and, you know, make a difference with respect to the spread of cancer, you know, that just sometimes you have to a strategy. It may not be right, it may not be legal, but ultimately it's what can you prove and show and justify. And if it comes to the safety and security of a loved one, well, I'll go pretty far.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and especially at end of life, you know, I know that you've got some big news you're going to share with us in a minute, but, you know, it's somebody in that situation. I mean, really, they're in the most vulnerable place you could imagine somebody being. And of course they need advocacy. And a lot of them, they need access to clean medicine, you know? So to be able to create a framework where, especially now, I mean, I'm seeing, and you've seen it too, I'm sure all of you have, you know, these big companies with really big C-suites coming on board and getting into the publicly traded world. There's a lot of money coming in. And instead of padding the pockets of CEOs or COOs or whatever, it'd be really nice to see that money go back into the people that really need it the most.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And being in what we've been doing for, you know, a few years that I've been involved, we see a lot of it. And, you know, it's really interesting because, you know, and Rob, you've seen this in the cannabis industry, and so has everybody here in BC and Canada. You know, just even the quality of the government cannabis compared to what we used to get from the medical dispensaries, night and day, the price, the quality, everything. It's like they've taken this natural product, commodified it, made it all about money, and they forget the people who actually fought the fight to get it to that point with all the medical dispensaries and the things that they were doing. and talk about the price of mushrooms or any of the plant medicines, they grow pretty wild and pretty natural if you tend to it right. And Casey and I had this conversation earlier that nobody should be denied the healing. If these plants are for humanity, which we say, believe, and we're told they are from the plants, then price should not be an option. This is about healing humanity, and if you start putting a price on that, it becomes commodified again. And once we decriminalize nature even more, what's going to happen to that? It's and you talk about, Selena, the CEOs making all the money. It shouldn't be about generating profits for shareholders. It should be about healing the planet, and it starts with the people. Because and Rob, say to what you said, there is absolutely every resource on this planet to make it all work, because there's not a lack of resources here on this planet for anything, for starvation, for wealth, for abundance, for prosperity, for healing. It's our lack of resourcefulness as a society, as humankind. Some people are pretty damn resourceful, and they can make something out of nothing because they're resourceful. And that guy who's got the person who's got all these resources doesn't make a difference. Right? And that's where we have to get resourceful. Where there's a will, as long as we're committed, there is always a way. And that's why we're here today, even having this conversation.
And I think that what I'd like to add is just, as far as access is concerned, and I mean, I've been in the industry of natural healing for probably 15 years now. I've been practicing as a naturopathic physician for 8 years. And I really like the excitement around access for psychedelics. And I think that they are a Trojan horse for access to all innovative healing modalities. So it's not just psychedelics that we have a right to. It's the choice to heal ourselves in any which way, obviously within reason. So there's a lot of things that people don't have access to. And the healthcare system is quite limited in many ways. It's got a lot of pluses. If I break a leg, let me tell you, I'm going to the hospital. But as far as chronic condition healing, mental health, which is what we're facing, addiction, all that kind of stuff, we don't have very good modern therapies for this kind of thing. And even when you look at the movement to all the movements that have happened over the years to reduce access to vitamins and to minerals and all kinds of natural substances get blocked. And in the US there's a massive campaign to basically reduce access to compounding pharmacies and compounded substances. So even though these are synthetics, a lot of them, they are being used in very progressive ways by people who, in generic forms that aren't for profit, that are there to, for the healing and benefit of people. So, I think that we're kind of diving into a bigger human right issue, access to nature, access to choice and how we want to heal, access to innovative healing modalities. All of these things kind of come up. And I think what I love about the modern psychedelic movement right now is it's really bringing that concept of choice and access right to the forefront. And so what I'm hoping is that opens up the dialogue for all forms of natural healing and all forms of innovative and transformative healing that isn't, profit, motivated by profit or motivated by over medicalization or over I guess it's still profit driven at the end of the day, but you get into like needing 18 double-blind placebo-controlled trials for everything, when things have been used, especially when you go to traditional healing modalities that have centuries, if not millennia of history behind them of use. So
well, there's a combination of factors like banking, international banking regs, and just the rules at the UN level, right? And so, not to be devil's advocate or legal counsel to the big businesses, but one of the things I had to appreciate is well, if you've got a bank account and you get audited and you can't account for your feedstock and the origins of your materials, bank's not going to care. The international financial standards and regs aren't, you'll lose your account, and then your import, your export. And so ultimately the question that we should be looking at is, what do we need to do so the banks and the international banking regs and the rules and restrictions that then will allow something short of medical research getting a bank account, because that ultimately is a big hurdle for everyone. It's just the companies that are able to operate within standards and what the law is now versus what the law should be is sort of the order of the day. But look, that is going to be the biggest challenge for all the well-meaning folks, whether you're a private company, an unincorporated association, a group of illegal underground operators. Ultimately, you're going to have to perform to a legal standard. And once you cross into whether it's decrim or a legalized regulated industry, bad pennies are bad pennies. Illegal feedstock is illegal feedstock. So the greater question is, how do we then widen the remit to now take care of the banking, right? To then take care of the standards and the regulations that make it so restricted. And just to give an example, I mean, in the 20s or so, cannabis was touted to be the billion-dollar crop. You know, hemp was going to save everybody. And our well-placed arguments from the synthetics and chemical companies saying, well, no, we got to protect, we got to conserve. Right. And, you know, keep all these naturals where they are and embrace chemicals and synthetics where, again, I think it comes down to balance. Nature is going to solve some of our problems, but it's not going to solve all of them. What will is balance. And everything is so out of balance, from international banking right down to how we regulate land use for dispensary. So, you know, we haven't even fixed those problems, and now we're about to throw on a whole set of new problems and concerns onto the fire. I'm a lawyer. I get paid, you know, a good chunk of money an hour. But for the average consumer and member of the public who wants to benefit from these wonderful plants and substances, unfortunately, is, you know, kind of out of luck for the next little while. But the good news is, and sorry to just let me play through on this, but just before the call, many of you are aware of the TheraSil Coalition. Well, Dr. Bruce Tobin has been assisting 4 patients, and we applied TheraSil. When I say we, TheraSil applied with the medical patients, and effectively it'd been 100 days for the minister to make a decision. And we found out this afternoon that all 4 of our medical patients have been granted a ministerial exemption under the CDSA to be able to access psilocybin for end-of-life PTSD and anxiety.
Yes.
So that's big. I mean, look,
so awesome.
If we woke up this morning staring at a closed door, that door's open a little bit now.
That's incredible.
Well, and you know what? Now that this back door is open, it creates space for so much more to flood through. You know, and like you were saying earlier, Rob, you know, at end of life, like there's no better reason to be doing this. You know, and I think, I don't know, I'm just excited because I really do see this as something that's going to bridge a whole bunch of worlds. You know, like Ray was saying, you know, we get to play in both realms. You know, the natural medicines, you know, nature-based, and the synthetics, and bringing it together in a way that really makes the most sense for the individual that's taking it. And I think that this is going to blow the lid off of what reasonable access really is all about. And it really is about making sure that the people that need the medicine the most actually have the opportunity to take the medicine, you know? So I'm excited. So congratulations to you guys and TheraSil. And I'm so stoked. And what I can share from my end, so Flower of Life, we are a clinic. We are looking to help patients in our own region at end of life work with psilocybin, and the physician that we work with, Dr. Fair, is open to prescribing, which is really great. So you guys literally just kicked the door down for us to be able to do that work in our own community. So thank you.
Well, it doesn't answer where is a legal supply. What does that look like? It just makes the issue more paramount now that the government will need to figure this out, because the black market already has it figured out from their end. And well, do we want to have the same tale of two cities we've seen with cannabis? I'd like to think that lessons will be learned, but from what I'm seeing in capital markets and folks trying to raise money on things that they haven't even figured out yet, in some instances, is quite revealing. Now, in others, I think if, this is a great opportunity for folks that know what they're doing and actually have some substance and systems and analysis behind them. Because there's going to be a lot of people trying to invent stuff as they go right now. The fake it till you make it, Silicon Valley way, if you will react to the news today. And I think you're going to see even more entrance to the market, good, bad, or ugly, or otherwise. But nonetheless, this is a start, and I'm excited.
I'm stoked. And I'm curious, Rob, do you think that it could be possible to do like a Compassion Club Society model like we had with the Section 56 with cannabis?
Where, it's all possible.
The black market medicine will come in and it'll be available. We can have lab testing available to make it a certain standard and quality and then continue to transition in that way? Or do you see it rolling out differently?
I think it's all a race to the bottom. I mean,
I agree.
Me a long time, right? That's what I've said about cannabis for probably 5 years. And I've been at the bottom my whole life. So it's kind of like exciting that way. But ultimately, that's what it is big companies. I mean, I'm lucky to work for TheraCann, and just because they're big, but they actually do things where they can replicate with minimal batch variation. Now that's impossible to difficult to do. Anyone could grow a big, vast messy green, but then to replicate it and, literally have the, the analytics and the procedure to do something like that says something. And just because big companies doesn't mean that they don't engage small scale and replicate the small scale so as to keep the integrity of the medicine. But, what does that look like? It just looks like, honestly, that companies that don't figure these things out now, like how TheraCann did with cannabis, are just going to waste a lot of money and try a whole bunch of stuff, and they won't be in business. So I think that is the key, what's your track record? If you were in cannabis, what was your track record in cannabis? Where do you operate licensed facilities? Are you profitable? Are you economical? Is your product any good? Right? Those kind of questions. And I mean, that will separate probably 90% of what I've seen in the capital market space that is effectively just pivoting because because the market's hot on psychedelics. But unlike cannabis, we're at this really interesting RV Parker stage. We just got ministerial access. So we're technically now in a post-Parker era, but from Parker and cannabis, it took 15 years to Allard, to where we got to legalization and a legal framework. And then 3 years after that, for a total of 18 years to legalization with the passing of the Cannabis Act. So ladies and gentlemen, we're right at the start. This is a marathon, not a sprint. And I think due diligence, asking tough questions, and actually understanding what the offerings that people in the psychedelic space have will better position and enable you to determine, is that something you want to get involved in?
Yeah. And I don't know, I can speak from my experience in cannabis, especially watching everything unfold over the last 8 to 10 years. It really is a race to the bottom. And my concern is the monocrop, like Ray was saying earlier, where you're growing on a mass scale, one species with no biodiversity. And what I can say too, in the cannabis space anyways, is you can absolutely see the quality shift, like Mark was saying earlier, where instead of growing on a small scale with somebody who really cares about the medicines and cares about the people that are receiving the medicine, we have a completely different intention that's happened in cannabis, and the quality has gone down. And I think that's why the legacy market is still thriving, is because we have these awesome epic growers that are in the community producing incredible quality flowers, and I think that is going to translate over to psychedelics as well. On that note, I was going to say too, epigenetics plays a really big role. So for example, there's a local LP here in the Okanagan who had a cultivar that was testing at 28%, and they had the exact same grow conditions, all the temperatures were the same, the soil was the same, but they changed out the grower. And their vibe didn't really jive with the plants, and their last batch tested at 14% THC. So same genetics, there's something to be said about your relationship with the plants and how that translates into the medicine that they can produce. So I hope that moving forward, we'll also keep that in mind. And I know that you were sharing with me too, Rob, that, those small scale producers, even, in those bigger markets, I think that's where we're gonna hopefully see that gap bridged, where we can have quality medicines, because we're being more mindful about the conditions that those plants and fungi need.
Well, take a peyote cactus. Oh, sorry, Mark, but like peyote, most people, I understand, harvested incorrectly. There's an extreme long, production period or growing period, and that just highlights the importance of sustainable ecological stewardship with regards to the interaction with these plant medicines. Sorry, Mark, I cut you off.
No, that's all right, Rob. I just wanted to kind of sidestep on what Selena was talking about is, the care, the energy, the attention we put into growing not just a cannabis plant, but the plants and fruits and vegetables in our garden, in our yard. Because all plants are medicine in some way, shape, or form. And they've proven time and time again that whatever you grow in your backyard has way more. I wouldn't know the percentage more, but when you're caring for it yourself in your own garden, in your own care and attention, the nutritional value, the taste, everything to it is that much more than what you're getting from an industrial produced, don't give a shit, we're getting the mass yield we can, we're spraying it with all sorts of crap, we're sending it to the supermarket, and now you've got really a food-like product, wrapped in cellophane. It's been treated and conditioned to ship and last longer, and it's losing all of its nutritional value. And we have to, when we look back at balance, we look back at nature and all nature for its healing. It's being in nature, it's eating good nature, it's consuming and being part of, in its natural form and habitat, not something that's been genetically modified to reduce bugs, pests, yield more, not go to seed so fast, all of that stuff that people, I think, really need to wake up to. The masses need to wake up to the fact that the crap you're going to buy in the majority of your supermarkets isn't all that good for you. And then we wonder why we have chronic illness all over the world today, especially in North America.
Yeah, what you're saying reminds me of food culture, so when we see these epic chefs that are making these incredible meals, it really comes down to the quality of your base ingredients. And if you have a relationship with your food, I feel like there is this symbiosis. I mean, nature has created this food in order for us to ingest and then spread her seeds. So if we're removing her seeds, or we're spraying her with pesticides and chemicals, or we've removed ourselves completely from the process, you're completely right. I mean, you're not going to benefit the way that you necessarily would. And I would add to that, I can speak to my own experience. My grandparents were farmers. They moved to North America, got totally caught up in the liberated housewife and the instant meals and trying to free up their time at the detriment of their health, and their relationship with nature. And I can say, as a third generation down the road, I'm rediscovering how to plant seeds again, how to grow different vegetables together, and who likes to play in the soil together and who doesn't. And, creating that healthy living soil, microbially rich, chock full of healthy mycelium, so all of that is so important. And I feel like, part of what's happening with psychedelics and these pure plant medicines is they're reminding us that not only is this necessary for our survival, but we also have these skills and tools within us. And honestly, I can speak from my own experience. It doesn't take long to begin to start a garden again. And you'll be so surprised at how delicious that fresh fruit and vegetable is that you pick from your garden and you make something with. And if you're cooking and you're sharing it with people that you love, like your family and your friends, like that also is medicine. That love translates. So yeah, I really appreciate you bringing that up, Mark. I think
when COVID hit, we joined and this is the other thing, like I'm busy. I'd love to learn, and that's a goal for next year, is a proper home garden. Also with having toddlers, they're just going to rip it apart. So that's why I want to wait till next year. But ultimately, we joined a garden co-op in Cedar on Vancouver Island. It's this couple, and they grow the food and divide it up between the members of it. And, we have fresh fruit and vegetables delivered. And So I guess the point I'm trying to make is like being too busy, there isn't an excuse. And with COVID, more and more people are realizing that food dollars and food miles are changed. And I think, you know, we're so lucky to live in British Columbia and on the West Coast and Vancouver Island. In that, you know, there now is there, I'd love to see more local produced, sustained, shorter food miles and local food dollars, because ultimately, why are we shipping this halfway around the world and getting strawberries and certain produce that really are luxury food items, that maybe it doesn't make sense that we're getting strawberries at like 5 cents at a unit or whatever it is, given what it takes and the cost and so on. But
Well, and it comes down to this, the whole colonialistic world we're living in. You know, I got to know my grandfather in his later years, and the one thing he told me I thought was quite interesting was his parents, when they came over from Holland, they always said, always have a home that has a yard so you can always grow a garden. You know, imagine if you take a look, I look around my neighborhood, if everybody had a garden in their yard, you'd feed this whole neighborhood times 10. If I maximized our yard, there'd be more food than we could ever consume in this house for a year, you know, and there's tons and tons of opportunities that if people got, you know, less screen time away from their phones into their garden, they're going to have a better immune system, they're going to be happier, they're going to be healthier, and it's exciting when you start seeing things growing, you know, and you can eat right out of the yard.
The first step in, I guess, becoming free is, well, learning you're in a cage, and you're, you know, and that's the first step is, well, and then at least from that awareness is, well, I can open the door, and what next?
Really?
And that what next is starting to make informed decisions about what do I need, what do I do, what do I support, how do I do it? And I mean, a long time ago, I kind of came to that realization, well, the world is the way it is. What am I going to do about it? And ultimately, with my you know, with my enthusiasm with psychedelics, I mean, that it really, everything boils down to a choice. And that choice is like a breath. It can be a positive breath or a negative breath. And I know that's easier said than done, but choices are much like that. And it's where are you going to spend your money, and how are you going to put that back into society? And well, you can take a page from Malcolm X in terms of what he was prescribing to the Black community. I think a lot of that can be on a larger focus and basis now with how will we spend our money? What types of businesses should we collectively support, right? What is important with regards to food? Do we want to be rewarding junk, or do we want to be rewarding sustainable nutrition? And I mean, COVID, all bets are off with COVID now. We get to kind of go back to the drawing board. And the nice thing is all these arguments about sustainability, ecology, stewardship over the land, you know, those are now even more relevant and necessary.
Totally.
So this is a battle cry.
You know, so, and you're totally right. Like, where will you put your energy and attention? And I mean, we all have the same amount of time in a day. We can all allocate that time resource in a certain way. And what I will share with you is on my last mushroom journey, one of the gifts that they shared with me is that your presence is your purpose. So where you're bringing your presence, where you're bringing your awareness, where you're bringing your attention, you know, so if it's, you know, working 14-hour days for some job that you hate, okay, you could also take 2 hours of that and you can put it into growing a garden, or even just like nurturing some plants in your home, or going for a nature walk. You know, it is a choice. And I think a lot of the times, especially in a westernized culture, we think we don't have that choice, but we absolutely do. And what I'd say too is I think we're also conditioned to give away our power in that way. And I think that's part of the lessons that these plants and these kingdoms can really give us is, you know, the power is always within you. And it really comes down to how you decide to live your life.
Yeah.
I think one of the things I just want to add to that is, you know, the dangers of going into personal choice. And this is just, again, where I came to earlier when it comes to who is able to, or who is resourced enough to actually understand and know that they have a choice. And this is where we get into a bit of a chicken and egg. And I do think psychedelics play a big role in this. And I also think all kinds of therapies, trauma therapies, you know, with whether transpersonal therapies, any kind of therapy that reconnects you with who you are, your family, your community, will actually allows us to be able to take that breath and look around us and actually make that choice, because that's where I came to, when I was in the environmental movement, is that, it's so easy, in a lot of ways easier said than done. And I think that we need community structures. So we need to also nurture community structures and systems that really support healthy human relationship at its core, so that we actually are resourced enough psychologically and socially to make those choices. Because if it was that easy to create gardens, and if it does actually taste that much better, which I also attest to, why isn't everybody doing that? And I think that we're suffering. We focus on underserved populations a lot, but actually the majority of humans are not present in day-to-day life and are suffering or worried about finances, or and especially after COVID, or during COVID, or whatever stage we're in with COVID right now. It's just going to get worse. And as far as the excuse not to better your life due to survival, with small businesses closing, there's going to be massive economic consequences to what's going on right now. And suicide rates have gone up, opiate deaths have gone up. And so, how do people who are resourced enough to make the decision to make community gardens help others also make those decisions and support others to make those decisions? Right? So it's yeah.
Well, I think one answer to the question, if I may, Casey, sorry, is, we have to lead by example, and it's got to start somewhere. And to answer your question, why don't we all do it if it's kind of a natural thing? I think we've all, like Selena was saying, we've all been conditioned from going to school, from society, from all this business that's happened over the past 150 years. We want instant self-gratification, where that's our generation. We want high volume, low price. We want everything's cheaper, is why we've all gone to China for everything. And we've gotten so busy being human doings that we've lost sight of what's really natural. And I think I've seen some during this COVID stuff. I think in Scotland, they were taking kids back to school when it was all kind of starting. They put them outside in the classroom, working in the gardens and yards and teaching them those things. But I personally think that part of it has been the way that we have, we've all gotten greedy for all of this, the stuff that we don't need, that we rape and pillage our planet for, in terms of mining and production of plastic and everything else. And it's all somewhere at the very top, corporate greed, right? And the profit of the shareholders. And like Rob was saying, we vote where we spend our money. And if we all start spending our money in, conscious businesses, people who are aware of what's going on, and they're giving back, and there's a balance in what it is versus just taking and not giving, we need to be more aware where our dollars are going. And so many people just aren't aware. And as this great awakening keeps happening, people keep waking up. We need to be leaders in community.
The good news is the difference between, and Daryl Kopke, a Vancouver entrepreneur, summed this up real great. He said, you know what? The difference between Generation X and Generation Y is this. Generation Y, they're the same, except Generation Y gives a shit. And it's pretty evident in how they hold. Generation Y does hold consumers accountable. I mean, 20 years ago when I was in my undergrad, you'd hear about people taking on big corporations and boycotting. But with the Arab Spring 10 years ago, and now you see how people through social media can name and shame and coordinate efforts literally to force change. That tells me, and now you add with what's happened in the last 3 months since COVID, with racial inequality and injustice, and just the addressing issues about the inaccessibility to justice, for example, and how the court systems, just not to get too far down another path, but they've had to modernize and figure out ways about, well, how do we get before the courts? And that was so long overdue. So ultimately, I think there's a need to let go of old ways and old selves in order to truly be ready to embrace all of the future. And I mean, that's hard. Letting go of the past is extremely tough, but it's only when you deal with that, put those issues, that you can then fully embrace and appreciate what the future has. And well, psychedelics do play a part in that as well.
Well,
Yeah.
I'm just going to wrap it up here. We're getting pretty close to time, maybe a little bit over. But yeah, one thing that I really want to talk about before we head off is like how important the spirit of the plant is in cannabis, in psilocybin, in carrots, in everything. So why shouldn't that be the focus? You know, like we're going to eat and eat and eat and not be satisfied and search for ourselves within the people around us. And everyone's just trying to get a piece of the pie. So why don't we make it readily available for everybody?
Well,
I
let me use a quick cannabis example, and then I'll say nothing further. But let's just say full spectrum, and Selena, back me up anytime because you're the most experienced cultivator on the call. But you take full spectrum CBD naturally produced from the plant versus Nabalone, Sativex, or Marinol, which are the synthesized versions, which Big Pharma tried to bring to market, and they don't work. So perhaps we will see the same things with psilocybin, just as, sure, you can synthesize these compounds, but do they work as well as the full spectrum natural medicine? And we'll have to wait and see. But in the case of cannabis, it's very clear there's no substitute for the natural plant. So to sum up, the relationship and the importance of the spirit of the plant, the relationship with the plant, and the connection of protecting nature, so that these plants, we can continue to have that relationship, is utmost important.
Yeah,
Yes.
I totally agree with you there, Rob. And in regards to those the synthetic compounds, I think one of the reasons why that was a foot in the door was so they could get a DIN number, so a drug identification number, so they could bring it to market. A lot of the earlier research when they were proving harm with NIDA, the National Institute of Drug Abuse, was actually referencing a lot of those synthetic compounds. Now, when used properly, when used in the right context, like Ray was saying, they can be very helpful. And also, I will say, and I'm not like, yay, Sativex, but they're also expensive. Sativex is completely inaccessible for most patients that need it if they're paying out of pocket, period. So you need an insurance plan. There's a lot of moving parts. In regards to your question, though, Casey, I really love that you brought that up, because I think one of the things that I know I can speak for myself, anthropomorphizing, inanimate objects, for example, or plants, is seen as a fallacy, or it's like a negative thing, or it doesn't really exist. And I think that's actually part of the insanity that we've bought into in this culture, where we are separate from everything, and the only real thing is ourselves. It's very individualized. And I think it's really cool that you talked about, even celebrating the spirit of the carrot, because everything has an essence, everything has a spirit. If you look in other cultures, even my mug has its own essence, its own purity. Maybe it's not alive like a carrot, but there's something there to appreciate. And I think once we move more into a realm where we can connect again, and we do take a time, like a moment, and say, okay, this tree behind me, for example, is thriving because of the love that I've given it. And it's also, gifting me fresh air for me to breathe. There's this symbiotic relationship. And I think that's really part of why it is so important to appreciate the essences and the spirits of these plants. It is at its core, we're co-evolving together, and it is a symbiosis. And I think it's absolutely important. And Rob, I will agree. I mean, I've seen it time and time again. Full spectrum, whole plant medicine, full spectrum cannabis, for example, way more effective for medical patients and for therapeutic use than a synthesized compound. So again, there's a lot of nuances we could go into, but yeah, 110%.
Yeah, I think my perspective is pretty wide reaching. And I think just because I have to, I take into account people's very deeply held personal views and relationships with medicine and also the world around them. I do really love the more animistic and indigenous worldviews that really not just see the spirit in plants, but that the entire world is alive around us, that we're on a one big living, breathing planet, and that we're all connected. And I also, because of that, definitely see even the most synthetic things, even plastic, as part of the natural world around us. And I'm not saying that there's a right or wrong when it comes to medicine. I definitely, there's many instances with plants where the whole plants are actually definitely more useful. And like I said earlier, there are the right tool for the right job, right? And it's really understanding what people need in the moment, and I also think that having a relationship with plants and with nature is in itself part of the healing process, like outside of the ingesting of that plant. So yeah.
I completely agree with you. Yeah, for sure. I think when I've worked with patients who are growing their own medicine and they're getting to know the plants, and then they're part of the process of turning that plant, once she's harvested, into the medicine that they're consuming, I've just seen it time and time again. Anecdotally, it just seems to work better for them.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I love it. And thank you for saying that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. What an honor. It's so great to have you all share your perspectives and to be passionate about something that's so close to our hearts. And yeah, keep fighting the good fight, guys.
Well, thanks for inviting us all to be a part and to share our perspectives with you. Honestly, this has been such an enriching chat, so thank you.
Yeah,
congratulations on your show. This is episode 2?
Yeah, I got 2. So the second episode, if you go to Bubble Man's World, so Marcus Richardson, super cool guy. Episode 2 is about making the connection with cannabis. We also talk about shadow work, so it's a biggie.
Awesome.
Cool.
Nice.
Awesome.
Mark, what's the latest on Spirit Plant with COVID, and any thoughts you can reveal at this time? Sorry to put you on the
We're
spot.
just getting ready to, that's what I'm working on this week. Spirit Plant Medicine, we have finally made the decision. You're hearing it here first, folks. It's going to be virtual. That's just the way it's going to be. There is no possible way to do it the way it can, should, and needs to be done. Especially right now with 50 people at 6 feet apart and with what is expected to come down the pipe. So I'm going to take everything I've been learning about live streaming and doing great events and part of my role in the Tony Robbins community to make this the most interesting, fun, and interactive virtual conference for 3 days. So it's
Cool.
it's going to be interesting. It's going to be fun, and you get to tune in from the comfort of your own home. But we're going to make it interactive and as exciting as we possibly can. So we're just kind of ironing out the details. Probably be working with HubSpot again through their studio, and just really bringing it together in the same way, the same speakers, because nobody's able to travel right now anyways, and it's just the way it is. So it is not our 10th anniversary event. It is it's our first annual virtual live stream is what it is.
There you go.
Right? But we're saving the 10th anniversary. Will probably be coming in 2021 when all of this stuff blows over, if we're lucky enough that way, because we want to bring people together. That's what's important for us. And we're not going to shortchange it by doing it online and virtual. So we got a few packages coming out, and to make it easy and accessible and affordable for people, and ultimately we want to make it fun and interactive, because part of the conference was about building community and bringing people together. So I've learned a few things in the Tony world that we're going to incorporate here and work to make that happen.
Beautiful.
How with the challenges of this time, we've really been inspired to evolve and get creative and think outside of the box. So I'm really grateful that you guys are going to keep it going and still have it available for people, because it's a huge community and I think it's so necessary.
Absolutely.
Especially now. And it's going to be even more accessible to people then, because your overhead is less. You're going to be able to market it to so many more communities worldwide. It might be a delightful surprise. Who knows?
That's kind of what we're expecting, and I want to thank you, Selena, just for bringing that up, because anybody who's watching in these most interesting times, if we look at it as a gift, it really is. There are ways to adapt, to improvise, to
Mhm.
learn, to grow, to find new ways. And this is again what I was talking about earlier about being resourceful, right? You know, what is it we can do? Let's not talk about everything we can't do. Let's talk about what we can do, and then let's freaking do it.
Mhm.
Let's do something.
Yeah.
Learn from who's doing well right now and what's going on in the world. And it's interesting that this is a conversation about nature today, when one of the biggest booming niches in our economy right now is gardening, agriculture. We had to wait for, my roommate waited weeks and weeks for seeds to get shipped from Delta, which was not far, right? Like, it was just because everything was out of stock. But that's one of the things that's growing, is it's a nature niche that's growing. And that's why I think it's important everybody gets back to nature. Everything happens for a reason, and this is part of us slowing down, going more within, so that we can bring more of that outside of ourselves for a better world, not just for ourselves, but for everybody we touch. And we need to be that beacon of light. We need to talk about positivity and expectation versus being fearful. And this is not a time to be afraid. This is a time to rejoice, do the right thing, protect yourself, protect your loved ones, protect your people, and do your best, right? It's really what it is for me. And it's, it's not how I can't do it, because if I can't, I must. It's how am I going to do it? And being in the events industry and the business, we got to find new ways. And if Tony Robbins can do it with 22,500 people from around the world for 4 days for 14 hours, we could do it for 3.
Oh, for sure.
All right.
And Casey, I just wanted to say to you, congratulations on your show and your podcast. I appreciate so much that you've decided to share your heart and share this information with the world. So thank you for being courageous and making this possible.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's awesome
Thanks,
to hear.
Casey.
Mhm.
Always a pleasure.
Yeah, well, I think that just about wraps it up. We probably all have things to do today and things to get on with, but yeah, thanks so much, guys.
Yes,
Thank
thanks
you,
so much
Nick.
for the
Thank
invite. Thanks,
you.
everyone.
Woohoo.
See you next
Thank you.
time.
And congrats
See
to
ya.
Claire Phil. Woo.
Woo.